Hey book lovers, my name is Em and I want to talk about books. And cats. Hey book lovers, so really quick, there will not be a regular episode next week. I am going on an adventure, and I won't have time to record and edit. Storytime with Em will continue. We are too close to the end of Feelers to skip a week now. So I am so excited that people are beginning to reach out to me about the podcast. It makes me super happy to know that people are listening, because sometimes it just gets a little weird, like I'm just talking to myself and editing myself, and it's nice to hear people's responses and know that I'm not alone with my microphone. I recently got a message from another podcast, one that I actually really enjoy, called Kill the Cat. It is hosted by director, editor, and cinematographer Ibrahim Faraj. I'm so sorry if I messed up your name. And screenwriter and script consultant Cat Soul. They break down their favorite movies and TV shows and analyze how and why they work. Topics include the only the best parts approach to The Princess Bride, the art of world building in Harry Potter, and the formula for a perfect Brooklyn Nine-Nine cold open. I just listened to an episode about creating dread, where they discuss the Netflix movie The Platform, which if you haven't seen it, you should check it out, but trigger warnings about everything. It's gory. There's cannibalism. And that movie is just so good and so messed up. And I love listening to them talk about it from like a writing perspective. It was, well, writing and filming, I guess, but story building. So definitely listen to the Kill the Cat podcast. They talk about writing in a very specific way and cover just really excellent movies and TV shows. They are funny and insightful, and it's a really enjoyable listen. I'm going to put a link to their show in the show description, so check them out. So this sparked me to decide on the next book for Storytime with Em, because we are getting very close to the end of Feelers, and I've been trying to decide which of my books would be next. So I think I finally decided on my novella, Catching Cats. You'd think that would be an obvious choice because of the podcast name, but it's very short. It's probably only going to be 10 episodes, but I think it has to be the next one. I'm really excited about it. It's one that I really enjoyed writing, and while it's not perfect, I am happy with it and ready to share. So here's a little blurb about Catching Cats, so you have something to look forward to for Storytime with Em when we finish Feelers in like 2 weeks. The epidemic is spreading. The first documented case was decades ago. Then it was just a handful of sightings, rumors, and of course the deaths. It's common knowledge now. See a cat, die within days. My sister doesn't have much time. There's only one way she can save herself. She has to catch the cat. Lark has watched her family succumb to the cat epidemic one by one. When she is at her most hopeless, a chance for a new and better life appears. But there is one thing she must do first. She has to do the impossible. So, Catching Cats is coming soon to Storytime with Em, but if you can't wait, there is a link to the book in the show description, so you can check it out. Anyway, for now, let's talk about a different book. Let's talk about Shari Lapena's book, Not a Happy Family. This is one of my newest ones from Book of the Month, and I enjoyed it immediately. First of all, the first page of the book has a quote from my favorite Tolstoy book, Anna Karenina. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. I wasn't sure how I felt about this book at first. It jumps around a lot and introduces a whole slew of characters right off. It's a bit muddled to begin with, but their stories begin to intersect, and it is immediately gripping, and it keeps you guessing right up to the end. The pace of this book never lets up, and I could not put it down. I had to know what was going to happen next. So, let's meet the family. The victims are Fred and Sheila Merton. Incredibly wealthy, Fred was a shrewd businessman and amassed millions. He was also a cruel psychopath who abused his family through terror and mental abuse. He pitted his children against each other. Fun fact, they have a name for this. It's called triangulation, and it sucks. Sheila is too weak and scared to stand up to her husband, and she checks out whenever he begins to attack the children. She actually shows very little interest in them overall, and they resent her for it. But they also understand. It's survival of the fittest, every Merton for themselves. The book begins quickly with Easter dinner, a catastrophe, as most of their family gatherings are. Fred manages to upset and insult everyone, and they all storm out. Well, most of them do, anyway. 2 days later, the Mertons are found dead. Sheila has been strangled, but Fred has been brutally attacked. It looks like a robbery gone bad, but something isn't right. The police are tasked with figuring out who killed this wealthy, prestigious couple, and absolutely everyone around them has motive. Each of them stands to receive a very nice sum of money, assuming they're not convicted of murder. The Merton children have never been close. They are extremely different people, though they all grew up in the same hellish family. But they were also not all treated equally. Catherine is the oldest and the favorite. It is well established. Her mother confides in her, and she gets the least amount of punishment from their father. She's also a doctor, the pride of the family, and married to Ted, a successful dentist. She is building the perfect life. Secretly, they are having trouble trying to conceive, but she would never share that with her family. On Easter Sunday, she is devastated to hear that her father plans to sell the mansion they grew up in, the one she had planned on owning once her father passed. He also makes some very snide remarks about her being childless, and she and Ted storm out. Dan and his wife Lisa are not far behind. Dan was always treated far worse than his sisters. His father had much higher standards for him, but also undermined him at every turn, so he was destined to fail and be subjected to more humiliation and vehemence from his father. Dan is married to Lisa, and she has always believed him to be a decent businessman and has always supported him. But secretly, Dan has made some bad business investments, and they are out of money. Like, completely out. On Easter, he has to ask his father for money, but doesn't even get the question out before he is shot down and belittled. They get out of there fast as soon as the chance presents itself. And that leaves Jenna, the youngest, the artist, the talented one. Her parents do not like her hedonistic ways or her genitalia-based artwork, but they do enjoy having a talented daughter. She is, however, the most difficult because she will argue back and stand up to her father. He threatens to take away her allowance often, but never actually has. Jenna has brought a new guy to Easter dinner. His name is Jake, and she barely knows him. They are both struggling artists swathed in leather. He tries to keep as cool as the family battle begins. He is the only one new to this show. He and Jenna stick around for a while after the others leave. Jenna has not been directly attacked this time. But what happened during the extra hour she was there is not entirely clear, and combined with the inheritance, makes her look suspicious. But she's not the only one. Catherine is not as squeaky clean as she presents. After the fight, she returns home, but she is pestered by something her mother wanted to tell her, but never got a chance to. When she tries to call, there is no answer, and she goes back over to talk to her mom. She returns home later, and all seems well, until her parents are found 2 days later. Then there's Dan. He had the biggest grudge of them all. He worked for his father for years with the idea that one day he would pass the company on to Dan. But then Fred sold it out from under his son and set off all of Dan's money troubles. After getting home, he went out for a drive to clear his head and was gone for hours. All 3 kids have things in their past that could make them capable of murder. But now there are very few people who know their secrets. They won't tell on each other, but there are a couple of other loose ends. First, there's Aunt Audrey. Aunt Audrey is Fred's younger sister, whom the entire family hates. Fred enjoyed telling her every bad thing his kids had done, and using a lot of creative license. She hates his children and his weak wife, and she is convinced her brother has changed his will to give her half of everything. She's out for money, revenge, and she genuinely wants to find out who killed her brother. She is maybe the only one who cares about him at all. She missed Easter dinner this year because she had a bad cold, but she already knows enough about her nieces and nephew to suspect them. And finally, there is Irina, the nanny turned housekeeper, who took care of the children and did her very best to protect them from their father's tirades. She did her best to make them good people, but it was a never-ending battle. Now she is a peripheral character in their lives. She was invited to Easter dinner, but also expected to clean up afterwards. She ends up being insulted as well as the children and leaves with Catherine and Dan. When she comes back 2 days later, she is the one to find the bodies. Irina is certain of one thing right from the very start. She will do whatever she can to protect the children. These are the known suspects. But there might be someone else, someone completely unknown to the family, who might also have something to gain. That's all I'm going to say because there is just no way to get into the plot of this book without destroying everything. I love the pace of this book. It really kept me guessing, kept me on my toes. It was a one-sitting read. I could not put it down. My family did interrupt me near the end, which, timing. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The story was so excellent, and I definitely recommend Not a Happy Family by Shari Lapena. And now we're going to take a very quick break, and then I will be back with some cat stuff and the newest chapter from Heart of the Storm. Hey, book lovers. I am still on my journey of learning German, and I am past my 1-year mark at this point. I am keeping the streak alive. I think I'm on like day 375 or something. Prisma Text has been a huge help. They offer a bunch of great classic novels that have words in German mixed right in. German for me. They do all kinds of languages. It's helping me expand my learning, and I'm reading books that have been on my to-read list for a really long time. You can check them out using the link in the show description, and use my code BOOKSANDCATS for 30% off your order. That's a great deal, and it helps support the podcast. Read and learn a new language all at once with Prisma Text. Welcome back, book lovers. So for today, I started thinking about the phrase curiosity killed the cat, which is what I'm assuming the Kill the Cat podcast is referencing, but I'm not sure. It's a well-known saying that is used to warn people against trying to find out something that does not concern them. But I was wondering, where did it come from? The answer is muddled. It started as a proverb, and it actually originated as care killed the cat. By care, they mean worry or sorrow, and not how we think of care today. So worry or sorrow killed the cat, which is not quite the same as curiosity. It kind of has a different meaning completely. That form of the expression, though, was first recorded in a play by the English playwright Ben Jonson called Every Man in His Humor in 1598. And that's really as far back as the history goes. It was eventually changed to curiosity. Again, kind of changes the entire meaning of the proverb. And then also at one point there was an addition to it of curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. Which honestly kind of makes no sense unless it's somehow tied into the whole 9 lives idea. I don't know. Like I said, it was muddled. I think it's just one of those old sayings that just has been handed down year after year after year, and no one really knows where it came from. Like I said, there's very little definite info on the origin of this saying. I think 1598 is long enough to count as an origin. Fun fact, it is believed that this performance was done by the company that included William Shakespeare. And I'm a Shakespeare fan, so I was kind of psyched about that. Anyway, so I don't really know where it came from. So while looking up this info, I kept seeing the question, why do cats have 9 lives? And this answer I was also interested in, and it was much more straightforward. Historians say that the Egyptians revered the number 9 because it was associated with their sun god, Atum-Ra. According to one version, Ra gave birth to 8 other gods. Since Ra often took the form of a cat, people began associating the 9 lives of Ra, plus his 8, with feline longevity. So that's where that one came from. Egypt. It might be older than the other quote. And speaking of quotes, let's bring it back to Shakespeare. This week, I just want to share a fairly well-known quote from Shakespeare's play, As You Like It. It's just speaking to me this week. I don't know. All the world's a stage, and the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man, in his time, plays many parts. We all have many phases of life, many roles throughout our lives, and we are forever changing, hopefully. For now, I'm just going to enjoy my role of writer and book podcaster because I'm loving it. And I love all of you. Thank you so much for making it possible for me to do this. And speaking of writing, it is time for a new chapter of my weekly writing project, Heart of the Storm. Things are moving toward the end, I think. So here it is, straight from my brain, with no editing, to you. Please enjoy Chapter 29 of Heart of the Storm. Martina tightened the belt around her waist. The heavy steel at her hip pulled at her pants, and the long, arduous trip had made her thin. Soon she would need to find new clothes. The mists were thick and filled with eerie howls and wails, snarls, and the sounds of snapping teeth and slathering jaws. A piercing cry cut through them all, and the night fell momentarily silent. Martina froze. Her fingertips grazed the handle of her weapon. Her muscles tingled with anticipation. Her body was coiled tight and ready to pounce. But the moment passed. The other sounds returned, and they seemed even noisier than before. Slowly, she let her body relax, just a little. She moved forward, inching through the thick, murky haze at a maddeningly slow pace. A loud grunt stopped her in her tracks. Whatever had made the sound was incredibly close. Too close. It could smell her. Martina heard the snuffling sounds to her left and lashed out quickly. She drew her sword and attacked the mists. Her steel hit flesh, and there was a squeal, followed by a terrible gurgling sound. 2 thumps. First the head, then the body. Whatever it was had been large. Blood appeared at her feet, and she moved quickly away. The scent would draw any nearby creatures. Better for her not to leave a trail of it behind her. She stumbled over something and broke into a run. The screeching that followed affirmed her fears. She needed to get to the safe house. She willed her feet to go faster. The ground changed to gravel, and she knew where she was. She began counting her steps. After 3 dozen, she hung a right and restarted her count. 333 steps, and the corner of the fire escape poked into view. She climbed quietly. Her steps on the rusty metal stairs seemed to echo in the mist. Below her, she could hear scratching and sniffing sounds, but they weren't close. Yet. On the 7th floor, she slipped through the open window. The glass was long gone. Very few people lived in this building, and no one lived above the 3rd floor. The safe house was apartment 709. Martina moved her hands over the surface of the door and heard the deadbolt slide back. She slipped inside and slid it back into place. Martina slumped into a chair and began to weep. The apartment had that effect on her. Here she could not put up her usual defenses. Her mother had blessed it with an enormous amount of protection, but it also made Martina feel all the emotions from which she could normally hide. This place had belonged to her real mother, the woman who gave her up and allowed her to be placed with the monsters who had raised her. The crying passed, and she took a long, deep breath. A heaviness weighed on her like a blanket, and she knew she would soon be asleep. There wasn't really time, but she knew she would be stronger for it. and right now she needed all of the strength she could stockpile. Soon it would all be over, one way or another. Kevo didn't know where he was. He could only assume he'd been absorbed into the river and reassembled in their realm. He vaguely remembered something like it from the old stories. He winced as pain shot across his brow. He couldn't think very hard in this place. Certain things brought a piercing pain, and he found it was much better to stay present and take in his surroundings. The room he was in was a silverish blue color with a deep blue carpet. It was soft under his feet, but did not offer much comfort for sleeping. Because there was nothing else. The room was windowless and empty. There was a warped wooden door that stuck when he tried to open it, but it did open with some force. There was a long, dark hallway on the other side, dark blue walls and a dark wooden floor that barely reflected the light from the soft blue-flamed candles that sporadically lined the walls. Between the candles there were other doors, but none of them would open. He had tried every single one, many times. Only the door on the opposite end of the hall would open, revealing a small washroom that was barely big enough for his wide frame. There was a small, round window made of thick, warped blue glass. It cast the room in an eerie, muted light, but he could not see through it at all. Kevo had no idea how long he'd been there. Based on the hunger pains, it had been a few days at least. He'd recently had his first hallucination. He had been certain he could smell something delicious and loaded with cinnamon. It had made the hunger pangs worse, but when the smell faded, they seemed to go as well. He just felt numb now, and tired. He was finding even the simplest movements exhausting. He routinely checked the doors, and his third time through was almost impossible. By the time he reached the last door, he could barely lift his hand. And again, nothing happened. Kevo stumbled into the shower and bumped the button with his shoulder. He dropped to his knees as the water fell, perfectly warm and soothing. It soaked through his clothes as he buried his face in his hands and cried. After some time, the water turned off, and he climbed out of the shower and stood dripping on the floor. He felt a little better, and his energy was somewhat renewed. As he entered the hall, he reached for the closest doorknob. Another check wouldn't hurt, though he knew that nothing would have changed during his short shower. But something had changed. The water from his clothes moved swiftly to the knob, which glowed brightly. With a blinding silver flash, the door evaporated, and Kevo felt hands grabbing at him and pulling him into the blinding blue light beyond. He didn't fight it. He was ready for whatever came next. Martina woke with a start. She held perfectly still and listened. Something was scratching lightly at the base of her door. She held her breath until the scratching ceased and whatever it was moved away. She exhaled slowly, keeping her breathing controlled and quiet. She still didn't dare to move. Only after the door to the stairwell opened at the far end of the hall did she swing her feet down to the floor quietly and move to look out the peephole. There was an eye looking back at her. She jumped back and clapped her hands over her mouth to stifle her surprised squeak. Then her hand went to her sword. The loud banging that followed made her take another step back. The apartment was small, and there was nowhere to hide. It hadn't seemed necessary. This place was supposed to be invisible. Martina moved quickly. She went around the apartment, collecting the things her mother had left behind. She stuffed them into a faded black backpack and topped it all with the book. The book was the most important. In the ceiling of the tiny hall closet was a hidden trapdoor. She opened it and shoved the bag in and crawled in after it. It was completely dark and humid. The sweat dripped off her almost immediately. She had just enough room to crawl through the narrow passage. She pushed the bag ahead of her awkwardly and elbowed her way after it. It was slow, sweaty work, and she was panting and soaked by the time she felt the air change. The tunnel was suddenly cooler, and she could feel the freshness of new air. Martina crawled forward until suddenly she could go no further. The passage ended abruptly. The bag hit a wall, and she came to a panicked stop. There was no going back. She'd been told that from the start. Her mother had been very clear. The trapdoor was only for an absolute emergency. She had said Martina would know when it was fine. She stressed the fact that there was no going back, but she would not tell her why. Martina closed her eyes and tried to calm her racing heartbeat. She could see her mother in her mind, the stranger who had found her on the shore and brought her to the safe house. Martina had been homeless at the time. She usually was. She ran from her home at 11, the first time the oldest brother tried to slip into the girl's bedroom. She was waiting for him and cut him with a small knife she had stolen from the kitchen and hidden under her mattress. Her foster father had been enraged. Not at his son. He blamed only Martina. He struck her with his open hand, and she saw red. She knew nothing afterward. She forced her way through the bodies of her supposed family, and when she reached the front door, she burst out into the cold, fresh night air. It gave her renewed energy, and she kept running. She never went back. By the time her mother found her, Martina had been living on her own for 7 years. The first few years, she stayed on the move. She never stayed anywhere for long, for fear that someone might find her. It was only later that she realized that no one cared enough to look. Then she found a family of her own, and a home. All that was gone by the time her mother found her, though. She had nothing to hold on to, and it seemed like the logical next step to go with this strange, wild-haired woman. Lottie had tried to love her, but Martina was too angry to let her. If she had known how little time they had, she would have let it go. She shook her head and let the moment pass. She opened her eyes to her current problem and was surprised to see a thin line of light on the boards under her fingers. She craned her head around and saw another trap door. There wasn't any other choice, so she punched overhead and pushed through the door. She pulled herself through and reached back in for the bag and her sword. The trapdoor slammed shut, and she turned to survey her new surroundings. There wasn't much to see. She was in a cavernous stone room with a high ceiling. Martina turned in a slow circle, examining the smooth stone walls. High above, near the ceiling, there was another door. She sighed and shouldered the backpack. She tied the sword tight to her and shrugged her shoulders a few times. The space between her shoulder blades burned, but she was used to it. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. She measured the distance with her eyes and bent her knees. One more breath. She closed her eyes and exploded upward. She gripped the stone with her fingertips and swung her legs around to kick the door in, and she slid in through the opening. And she kept sliding. The stone was smooth and polished, and she slipped down the steep slope, picking up speed as she went. The tunnel was dark with an occasional orb of silver light that flashed by in a blur. She saw the bright opening approaching rapidly, but there was nothing she could do. Then she was launched into the beautiful blue sky. She flew for just a moment, and then gravity took over, and she plummeted toward the boulders far below. And that's the end of Chapter 29, book lovers. I hope you're still enjoying Heart of the Storm. Make sure to check out booksandcatspod.com for past episodes, as well as Self-Care Saturday and Storytime with M episodes. And check out the links in the show notes to check out my newest book for Storytime with M, Catching Cats, and also to listen to the Kill the Cat podcast, which I highly recommend. Thank you so much for listening. I can't explain how much I appreciate all of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And until next time, keep reading.